Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of May of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Russian major offensive operation. According to several pro-Ukrainian sources, according to several pro-Ukrainian military experts, and according to Deep State, today on the 27th of May of 2025, the Russians began their major summer offensive operation. Currently, the clashes are taking place along the entire line of combat contact, starting from the northern parts of Sumy region and ending in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Kupiansk in the Zaporozhye direction. There are very heavy clashes, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. First, let's talk about the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. Russian offensive in this part started somewhere on the 24th of May of 2025. For example, this is the situation on the ground by the 24th of May, when the Russians just started their offensive operation. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation at that day reported that the village of Loknya was completely taken by the Russians. That attack allowed the Russians to pin down the Ukrainians in Kharkiv and not to allow them to escape this critical situation. And starting from the 25th of May of 2025, we were adjusting the map every single day in Russian favor. For example, this is the situation that you can see right now in front of your screens by the end of the 26th of May, when the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the village of Belovody. We have geolocation that confirm Russian presence in the most southern part of the settlement. Here we can see a Russian soldier with some flag of some unit that was most likely involved in this offensive operation. Furthermore, the group of forces north reported that as a result of fast lightning attack, the village of Volodymyrovka was also secured by the Russians. And by the end of the 27th of May, we got reports that the Russians continue their offensive, and currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Vodolahi. At the same time, as you can see according to this map, the Russians continue bombing and attacking deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. And as you can see, we have three icons to the south of these villages we've just discussed, and we see that the Russians are bombing and attacking exactly along the possible Russian roads of attack. So, for example, this airstrike took place in the northern part of Alexeyevka. Most likely the Russians with FAB tried to destroy the most edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. We expect due to this attack the Russians are going to move exactly in this area. Furthermore, the Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions behind of the village of Novonikolayevka. In this video we can see lots of artillery strikes and strikes with the tossed flamethrower system. Most likely the Russians were attacking Ukraine roads of supply. Most likely the Russians are going to move from the village of Vodolahi exactly in this area as well. Furthermore, we got several FPV drone attacks in the village of Yablunovka. Here we can see a Russian FPV drone that during the night period of time was flying above this area, searching and hunting Ukrainian vehicles and equipment. And as a result of this ambush, several vehicles of the armed forces of Ukraine were destroyed, as you can see on this video. So the Russians are moving further, and as we discussed in the previous videos, currently the Russians are trying to get and to cut NO7 road, which will allow the Russians to cut the Ukrainians in the area of Yunakivka from supply and support, and this will allow the Russians to create something like a cauldron for Ukrainians in this area. This is very important for the Russians because from first side, at the same time, the Russians need to continue offensive operation, but from the other side, the Russians need to be very careful, and the Russians need to save lives of their soldiers, because this is going to be most likely very difficult and very long summer offensive operation. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northeastern part of the city of Kharkiv, in the northeastern part of Kharkiv region. The Russians began their major offensive operation in this region as well. Today we got probably the biggest number of updates from the northern part of the city of Volchansk, and every single icon in this video shows us another place, another Russian soldier that was attacked by Ukrainian FPV drone. We are not going to open or watch any of these icons because the are lots of too many violence, too many casualties. Anyway, this video confirmed that the Russians, using small group of troops, were trying to get as close as possible to the border between the northern and the southern part of the city of Volchansk. We are talking about the river of Volcha, and based on this video we managed to geolocate at least 3 episodes that improve Russian positions. We are talking about this attack, this one, and this one. As you can see, this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 26th of May, and this is the situation by the end of the 27th of May. So we have additional blacks colored in Russian favor. Furthermore, and very important, that today several pro-Russian resources, more precisely probably 5, 10, 20 minutes before we started making this video, several pro-Russian resources reported that the northern part of the city of Volchansk was secured by the Russians completely. As for the end of the 27th of May, there are no more Ukrainian troops in the northern part, which is very important because now the Russians most likely will try to cross the river of Volcha and to enter the southern part of the city with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area completely. This is very important because at the same time the Russians began another offensive operation in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. The Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their position significantly in the village by the name Stroivka. This video was published by the Ukrainian site, and here we can see how Ukrainians of the 3rd Separate Tank Brigade was attacking Russians in this area. As a result of all these attacks, we managed to discover several places. This is the area of first attack, and this is the place of the second attack. Furthermore, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to capture another huge forest to the west of Kamenka. We are talking about this forest. And furthermore, the Russians during the previous day were bombing and attacking the village of Dvorichinsky. When talking about this village, we expect that Ukrainians were massing their troops, reinforcements, reserves exactly in this village with the purpose to send them, for example, in the direction of the border, in the direction of Kamenka, but the Russians destroyed those temporary deployment points, and currently the Ukrainians have huge problems with supply and support. So now we see that the Russians are trying to attack Ukrainians in this triangle between this red line, this border between Russia and Ukraine, and the river Oskol. So this is approximately the task of Russian forces for this part of major summer offensive operation. And when combining everything in the northeastern part of Kharkiv, in the area of Volchansk, we see that the Russians most likely are going to attack deep inside of this northeastern part of Kharkiv region with the purpose to establish complete control over this pocket. So this is the target of the Russians for the next, probably for summer, for the entire summer, maybe for a bit shorter period of time, because this pocket will allow the Russians to continue offensive operation further, both in the southern direction towards the city of Izium. Without control over the city of Izium, Russians will have less chances to establish control over Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, and also from these positions the Russians would be able to attack the city of Kharkiv from the south and from the southwest. So the Russians would be able to do something they haven't managed to finish in 2022, but now the Russians are trying to probably start everything from the beginning. Now let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction, or the Liman direction, where the Russians continue their offensive. And during the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers and geolocations, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly along the entire line of combat contact. Basically, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to take under control another forest on their way to the village of Grekovka. This video was published by the Russian sources, how Russians were storming another stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine in this video. This video was geolocated exactly in this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, we can see that the Russians are moving from the village of Novomikhailovka in the direction of Novomir, and with the purpose to outflank this settlement and to cut road between Algovka and Novomir as well. At the same time, the Russians continue their maneuvers and their outflanking operation around the village of Redkodub. And furthermore, as you can see, the Russians first of all managed to take under control the southern farms of the village of Redkodub. We have geolocation that can confirm this. We are not going to watch this video due to violence and casualties. At the same time, the Russians managed to cut physically the road between the village of Redkadub and Karpovka, and the Russians began bombing and attacking the village Karpovka itself with Taos Flammer 3 systems and FABs. So the Russians are about to finish this gap, to finish this flank, and then this will allow the Russians, without any resistance, without any problems, to begin moving further in the southern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement by the name of Liman. So this is the situation in this area, and we have reports that can confirm this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sivas direction. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the western part of the village of Verkhnykamensk. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks with the purpose to restore control over this northwestern part of the village, but all those attacks were repelled by the Russians. The Russians managed to save their positions and to dig in deeper. So most likely now it's Russia's turn to move further in the western direction, and we are waiting for Russian offensive in the direction of Novoselka. So this is another part of Russian major summer offensive operation. And now we are coming to the most interesting area. We are going to talk about the Konstantinovka direction, where the Russians most likely managed to break through Ukrainian defense, where most likely Ukrainian defense has collapsed completely, and currently nobody knows for sure where exactly the Ukrainians are going to stop the Russians and how are they going to do this. But the Ukrainians have already made their first step. According to information we have, Ukrainian general staff reacted on Russian breakthrough by sending reserves from Kursk. We are talking about 44th Mechanized Brigade, 82nd Air Assault Brigade, and 36th Marine Brigade. So Ukrainians, according to information we have, redeployed very important troops from the Sumy region in the direction of the breakthrough area. So this was, for example, the units of 44th. This is the units of 36th Brigade. By the way, we have already discovered some geolocations and videos with them in this area. Furthermore, according to that article, the Ukrainians have redeployed the units of 82nd Air Assault Brigade. And once again, and this is very important, all these brigades were redeployed from Sumy direction. These three brigades the Ukrainians used first in their Suja offensive operation, then Ukrainians were using them in Suja defense operation, and now the Ukrainians decided to redeploy these units to the Pokrovsk, Konstantinovka direction. And obviously now Ukrainians have huge problems in the Sumy area because they have no units. They have units, but now they have less units in comparison with the situation months ago. So basically Ukrainians decided, Syrsky more precisely, to sacrifice Sumy in favor of Konstantinovka Pokrovsk, because we understand that this area is much more important for Ukrainians than Sumy direction. So these brigades came to this area, but as for the end of the 27th of May, we still haven't seen anything that can confirm that this maneuver from the General Staff of Ukraine helped Ukrainians to stabilize the situation. Furthermore, we see that the situation is getting worse and worse. Now let's talk about this in details, and first let's talk about the most southern part of the Kliban-Byksky pocket, about this area. During the previous days, the Russians began their offensive operation in this direction, their final offensive. As a result of breakthrough operation, fast lightning attacks, the Russians managed to answer the village of Romanovka and the village of Zarya. That allowed the Russians to tighten the news around the Ukrainian positions in this pocket. The Ukrainians basically were caught in cauldron as a result of this fast lightning attack. The Ukrainians, since that moment, were focused just on one thing. They were trying to find a solution how to escape complete encirclement and how to hold this pocket and this neck and this corridor for as long as possible, because depending on this corridor, lots of Ukrainian soldiers' lives were depending exactly on this pocket, and the Ukrainians were completely focused on this. And while the Ukrainians were trying to hold this territory between the village of Zarya and the village of Romanovka, the Russians were bombing and attacking them in this area, and the Russians were advancing from the south. And today we got report that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the village of Stara Nikolaevka. This video was published today by pro-Russian resources. Here we can see the village of Stara Nikolaevka and two Russian soldiers that were waving with Russia's flags in this building that was geolocated exactly in this place. So based on this video and based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and based on several reports that were published by different mappers, we have adjusted the map in this area by coloring this pocket in Russian favor. Furthermore, as you can see, we still haven't colored territory around the village of Gnatovka. We still keep this area as a contested area or the gray zone. The thing is that the Minister of the Russian Federation haven't told us anything about the situation in this village. Most likely tomorrow the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm either complete control over the village or that a significant number of Ukrainians were caught in cauldron in this area, and now the Russians are trying to negotiate with them to surrender. Of course, either there is or this option. Anyway, we see that it's just a matter of time, it's just a matter of several hours, maybe several days, when this entire pocket would be cut by the Russians, and newly arrived brigades of the armed forces of Ukraine most likely will not be able to change anything in this area, because the Russians are trying to cut not just this pocket. According to information we have, the Russians managed to enter the western part of the village of Yablunovka, and this is even bigger disaster than the situation in the most southern pocket, because when talking about this pocket, it's just another layer, another bridged layer of Ukrainian defense. When talking about Yablunovka, this is the next defense layer, and the Russians answered this layer and managed to break through this layer as well. So according to information we have, according to several mappers, the Russians answered the village from the west, and the Russians currently are advancing in the eastern direction. You know that several sources reported that the Russians, after their first wave of attack that finished probably yesterday, the day before yesterday, introduced additional forces, fresh reserves, and the Russians began the second wave of attack. So basically everything that we can see right now today from this front line is already a work of the second, let's say, wave of Russian offensive operation in this direction. This is already the second wave of fresh forces. Obviously the Russians will use this second wave for 5, 6, 7 days more, and then they will introduce the third wave of attack, and then wave by wave with fresh forces the Russians are going to improve their positions along N32 road with the purpose to answer the city of Konstantinovka from the southwest and so outflank the city of Pokrovsk from the northeast. Now let's talk about the arc between the city of Pokrovsk and the Konstantinovka agglomeration. The Russians, according to these two geolocations, as you can see, established complete FPV drone control over the main logistic roads between these two stronghold agglomerations. So we have video, this one, where we can see probably dozens of episodes how the Russians were attacking and destroying Ukraine vehicles, supply machine, evacuation machines all over the entire arc area. We are talking about all these territories. Two episodes were geolocated, one in this point along the road between Pokrovsk and Drushkovka, Kramatorsk, another one between Pokrovsk and Drushkovka. This is very important because the Russians are getting closer and closer, and most likely we are going to receive more and more videos from this area. So the Russians continue advancing to the west of the N32 road, and according to information we have, the Russians answered the village of Popoyar from the south, and the Russians are advancing in the area of Poltavka in the northern direction. So as for this territory, the Russians most likely will try to take everything under complete control, everything that is located inside of this red line, and this is going to be a very, very difficult situation for the Ukrainians, because from this position, the possible distance between the Russian positions and the city of Konstantinovka itself would be less than or around 10 kilometers. So this is going to be already operational encirclement, where Ukrainians Ukrainians would suffer huge losses. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians were advancing in the western direction with the purpose to outflank the Pokrovsk agglomeration, with the purpose to attack the village of Razina, the villages of Shevchenko Perva, Koptiva, Novotoretsk, and Boykova. So this is the next target for the Russians, to take these territories under complete control. If the Russians can do this, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of Pokrovsk defense and Pokrovsk agglomeration. So we came to this based on this video that was published from the village of Mirne. In this video we can see a building where a Russian soldier raised another, probably not the flag of the Russian Federation, but the flag of some unit that was involved in the clearing operation. Based on this video, we have adjusted the western part of the village of Malinovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to secure the village of Mirne as well. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions in the vicinity of Mikhailovka, Mirolyubovka. As you can see, according to all these geolocations, now the Russians are focused to encircle the Ukrainians who are still located in this dense network of the fortifications. Most likely, these Ukrainians are no longer available to escape this encirclement in the direction of Novoekonomichne. Of course, Ukrainians from the settlement have some possibilities to maintain this corridor, or at least to have some fire control over this area, which will allow the Ukrainians under some cover and protection to escape the encirclement. But obviously this maneuver will be probably will have, during this maneuver, the Ukrainians will suffer huge losses. So this is the area of the major Russian offensive operation, of the major battle of 2025, and everything depends exactly in this area. We understand clearly what exactly the Russians are going to do and what are they planning to do. The city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the city of Konstantinovka and the Konstantinovka agglomeration is the main target for the Russians for this period of time. Only after the Russians are taken under control this territory, we're talking about this red line, most likely the Russians would propose Ukrainians for another round of negotiations and talks, where most likely the Russians would demand even more. They have already demanded. Furthermore, don't forget that while the Russians are going to fight here, we are going to get updates from this area, from Sumy region. So from now on, the Russians are going just to improve their positions along the entire line of combat contact, and increase pressure on Ukrainian positions. When talking about the South Donetsk direction, as you can see, this region is also very, very active. Today we got this video where we can see how Ukrainians were flying, how the Russians were flying above Ukrainian positions, and how the Russians were proposing and suggesting Ukrainians to surrender. This is the pattern. Now we need to wait for another offensive operation from the Russian side, which most likely is going to take place maybe this upcoming night or maybe tomorrow. Anyway, the Russians have already begun artillery preparation in this region as well, so we expect that the Russians are going to attack in this area. The Ukrainians began maintaining their lines and stabilizing maneuvers. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians counter-attacked Russians in the area of Gorokhovo, and according to information we have, according to several mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this territory. This is very important because if the Russians began their major offensive operation from the south like this, in the northern direction, then this will lead to the situation that Ukrainians would lose the only way for evacuation. So that is why the Ukrainians would be able to evacuate just through fields under open space under very heavy Russian artillery and FPV drone fire. So that is why, first of all, the Ukrainians need to secure the flank in Gorokhovo, and this will allow the Ukrainians to maintain this corridor for evacuation. So we expect that the situation, the things in this area will start developing very fast and very soon. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation with the purpose to outflank the village of Kamar, to attack this village from the east. Currently, there are very heavy clashes already for the village for Fedorovka. The Russians managed to have encircled this settlement already, so we are waiting for the beginning of the battle for the territory of settlement itself. As for the Gulyai-Poli direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything. As for the Zaporozhye direction, the Russians, according to information we have, launched their major offensive operation in this area as well. We have lots of drone attacks, but we expect that the main clashes and the main activities are going to take place for former prison in the southeastern part of Mala Takmachka. This area is under complete and over-focused from the Russian FPV drones. A lots of artillery strikes, a lots of FPV drone attacks, which means that the Russians indeed have some plans for this area, because if the Russians can establish control over this former prison, this will allow the Russians to probably advance further in the northwestern directions towards the village of Orekhov, city of Orekhov, without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.